Good afternoon. My name is Dimitra Scott, and I am the chair of the Family Law Department here at Beresford Booth. Our Family Law Department is not just divorces and child custody, although we do handle a lot of that. We have the unique honor of also practicing in the field of family formation. And today's webinar is going to focus on those particular issues. Family formation comes in a number of different ways. In particular, we have both adoption as well as assisted reproductive technologies. And the breadth and scope of the discussion we could have on all of those topics is pretty wide. So I'm going to focus us today simply on adoption. I'm going to do my best to share my screen here, which is a first for me, so give me a moment. Here we go. Sorry about that. So what I really want to focus on with you today in our limited time for this webinar is adoption in the state of Washington. And really, we're going to get even more narrow than that because there are multiple types of adoption that we're not going to be covering today. Sometimes people seek to expand their family or solidify their family through either an adult adoption or a step-parent adoption. We do that work, but we're not going to focus there today. Right now, we're focusing more on oh, pardon me, I think I've got the wrong screen shared. Give me one moment. Try this one more time. I think that should look better. So we're going to focus now on the three primary pathways to adoption, which, like I said before, we're not going to focus today on step-parent adoptions or adult adoptions. We're really looking at people who are looking to adopt third-party children. There are three primary pathways. We have the, you can go through a public agency, you can go through a private agency, or we have a independent or a private adoption. And each of those pathways are somewhat different. So that's what I'm going to address with you today. For the public agencies, this is what most people know today as the department in Washington, the Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services. They used to be known as DSHS. These are children that are in desperate needs of homes. Oftentimes they have been brought into the care of the state or through the agency through CPS. And oftentimes in this kind of a situation, you get older children. Children who have been in the system for some period of time and are looking for a final placement, a final place to call home. When you go through a public agency, you're going to be providing temporary care for a child and under the state's authority. And the state will be working on their primary goal, which is to rehabilitate and reunite that child with their birth parents. That is the state's first and ultimate goal. But in many cases, that doesn't happen because the birth parents are unable to correct the problems that they have. And ultimately, the state will move forward with termination of their parental rights, all the while you're providing this temporary care and custody of the child. Once that state has gone through the process of terminating a birth parent's rights, then the child is legally free and capable of an adoption. And it's at that point that you would oftentimes engage with an attorney, because at that point you're ready to move forward with the finalization. Going through a public agency can be a lower cost to a family looking to adopt. It can be a lower cost, one, because the state is actually doing a lot of the legal work up front to terminate a birth parent's rights. Also, in a public agency setting, there are opportunities for you to negotiate with the state a support contract for the child, which can include reimbursement of your legal expenses because those expenses are subsidized by the state and federal government. You can also negotiate in that support contract ongoing health insurance for a child, child care assistance, and there are things that you can do that the state will continue to provide some level of subsidy for you which can even be modified in the future as the child's needs change in the future. So like I said, we generally get involved as attorneys once you're ready to finalize in that kind of a situation, but oftentimes we'll provide some assistance along the way in the event there's any questions or concerns on the part of the parents who are seeking to adopt. There's also a slightly newer program called the Foster to Adopt program. And in this situation, the state attempts to identify children coming into the system that are not likely to be reunified with their birth parents. These are children who would be placed in foster home to a foster home, and they're looking to find a single foster home where that child might ultimately be placed for adoption in the long run. And so that's called the Foster to Adopt program. And for prospective adoptive parents to be eligible for that program, they have to go through not only the foster licensing, but they also have to get an adoptive home study done. And we'll talk about the home study throughout my presentation today because each step of the way requires a home study for adoption. But that's a precursor to getting into the Foster to Adopt program. This is a really high level overview of going through a foster program or going through a public agency for purposes of adoption. And what I would suggest to you is that it would be wise to go to DCYF in our state to their website in order to find out more about how to become a foster parent. This is just one of the resources available on at least our state's public agency. There are also some options available in adoption through what's called a private agency. So a private agency is more likely to have newborns in their program looking for adoptions. They're oftentimes going to be matching you with a birth parent, hopefully before the birth, if not just after the birth, so that you have some, you get to ride along a little bit in the course of the pregnancy. Although not all birth parents are as open as others in terms of having you being involved. For example, some birth parents will allow an adoptive parent to be present after the delivery at the hospital. Some don't want to see the adoptive parents, and so we have to make other arrangements. In a private agency, though, they're more likely to have newborn adoptions available. They're often licensed by DCYF through the state. They often contract with the state in their foster to adopt programs. Sometimes they're affiliated with religious organizations, sometimes they're nonprofit, but there are a variety of private agencies that you can reach out to for purposes of adoption. Because there's a variety of agencies, it's also important to note that each one has their own unique set of policies in terms of how they match birth parents and prospective families. Some of them even permit you or allow the birth parent to be the one who's in charge of choosing the family. They'll present them with families that are a prospective match, and the birth parent can make some selections based on for example, the degree of openness that the adoptive parents want to provide. And that's an important point too. Washington is uniquely situated for this family formation practice, and particularly in adoption, because we have a legal framework that allows for a number of unique benefits. One is that we can, in fact, create an open adoption. We can create a communication agreement with the birth parent so that the birth parent can receive cards, letters, phone calls, gifts, things like that, if they choose, and if the adoptive parents are receptive to it. And if they are, you can enter into that agreement and have this ongoing communication and ongoing relationship, limited or not, based on the parties' preferences. That's actually an enforceable agreement in our state. So birth parents in a private agency often are presented with some profiles and given the opportunity to choose who they think would be a best fit for their child. You're going to need to have a home study conducted before you're able to be matched with a birth parent. And through a private agency, they often have contracts or their own social workers who will provide and conduct a home study. A home study is essentially a document that certifies that you are capable of being an adoptive parent. that you are able-bodied, that you have the mental and physical wherewithal in order to provide care for a child. They also conduct a comprehensive criminal background check, which includes an in-state check for every state that you've resided in for the last 5 years, a national FBI check, as well as a criminal abuse network check. So it's quite comprehensive. And there are things that can limit you from being able to adopt. So it's important to go through that home study process so you know if you're able to adopt the child that you are potentially matched with. And it's a legal requirement before you can take physical custody of that child. Every private agency, their costs are different depending on the services that they're going to be assisting you with. Some agencies are more facilitative in finding a match, and once they've matched you with a birth parent and determined that it's a successful match, that's the extent of what they're likely to do in that process. And after that, you're going to be relying on your legal counsel and your own personal efforts for the follow-up steps. Some agencies do a bit more than that. They might take money into escrow and use that to pay some of the birth parent expenses that you've agreed are reasonable and the court has approved are reasonable to be paid. They might also assist in coordination with the hospital in the event you're going to be there for the delivery. And if they don't assist, then your attorney will do that. So every private agency is different. They all have a variety of different policies and a variety of different services to offer. And on that basis, their costs are different. But they will, but the primary benefit to using a private agency is that they have devoted a lot of time and effort and resources into finding both suitable adoptive parents and prospective birth parents looking to put their children up for adoption so that they can make that match. It's making that initial step and making that initial connection. That's where the private agency has really been beneficial and helpful to you. But simply signing with a private agency does not guarantee you will get a match, nor does it guarantee you a certain timeline. And that's something you should talk with the agency about in terms of their match rate and their timing on an average basis. Going with a private agency can be a more expensive route. It's certainly going to be more expensive than your public agency, where the state's taking a lot of the steps on your behalf. And you're being reimbursed by the state for some of your necessary and reasonable expenses associated with the care and custody of that child. In a private agency, it's the inverse. You're likely paying the agency for purposes of the match. You're going to be paying some of the birth parent expenses. You are also going to want to pay for a legal representative or someone to represent the interest of the birth mother and potentially the birth father in signing of the consents, because it's critical for you, it's critical for them to make sure that this is a cooperative and fair process and everyone understands completely the legal implications of what they're doing. So there's more expense associated with a private agency. So you want to know from the agency what it is you're likely to receive in exchange. There are many agencies out there, and we work with a lot of them. I'm going to show you a slide that shows just 2 of the agencies we've talked to this week. This is not in any way an endorsement of anyone in particular, but you can certainly do your own due diligence to find a private agency that can help you to match with a child. So these are just 2 of the agencies we've worked with recently, and there are many, many more. The last pathway that I wanted to discuss with you is the independent or private adoption. So this is potentially your least or middle ground in terms of expense on an adoption. The expenses that you'll likely pay for legal fees and birth parent expenses and home studies, those all still exist. But you are responsible for finding your match. You're going to use your own personal networks and efforts in order to find that match. There's not likely a licensed agency involved, so there's no person to pay for purposes of that match. And the costs are therefore just going to vary based on each birth parent situation. It's estimated that 60 to 70% of domestic newborn adoptions are placed through independent adoption processes rather than through an agency adoption. So in utilizing your own personal networks and in marketing yourself to everyone around you, saying, I want to adopt, we are ready to adopt, we want to adopt a child. You tell your doctor, your dentist, everyone at work. You potentially create a profile there are several websites that are somewhat like Facebook, but specifically geared towards finding birth parent matches. You can place an ad in the little nickel want ads. You're going to create some marketing materials for yourself, like your own Facebook page that says, hey, we're a prospective adoptive family. You're going to create potentially a Snapfish or similar competitor photo book so that you can show a prospective birth parent who you are and give them some ideas of what your family life is like, so that they can understand who it is they're placing their child with. You're going to put your personal effort and your personal time into finding your match. That's the primary difference. Most prospective attorney or clients in looking for a private adoption or an independent adoption will consult with an attorney early. And I would say this should go for oftentimes a private agency as well. The moment that you have a contact from a prospective birth parent, so that you can make sure that this is going to be a viable match. If you are posting ads online for an independent adoption and you receive a contact from a potential birth mother, oftentimes it's a good idea to do some vetting to make sure that this is a viable opportunity for you before you go too far down the road. Invest your time, your heart, and your efforts into that particular match. And that's where attorneys can oftentimes help. Before you can really start marketing yourself as a prospective adoptive family, you have to have a home study conducted. So our home studies are can be conducted by independent social workers, and we have a list of resources available to clients there to reach out to a social worker to have that home study conducted. Once you have that in hand and your background check and your criminal clearances have been approved, you are ready to go out and throw your efforts into your network. The cost is going to still vary, because when you do find that match with that birth parent, she or most likely it's the birth mother will have some reasonable expenses that need to be paid towards or throughout her pregnancy, to the extent that she needs some assistance with maternity clothing or additional food and utility expense, or reimbursement of some of her rent, some subsidy to assist her along in her pregnancy, and after her pregnancy, after delivery, for recuperation. It's important that you set a budget of expenses up front, and this is where your attorney can be of assistance, because we want to make sure it is a reasonable, necessary expense, and that these are things that the court will allow you to pay for the birth mother, because our courts do not allow for payments that are over and above what would be a reasonable, necessary living expense or reimbursement. It's also important to understand and to note that it's again important to have an attorney, or at least a social worker, who can go over the consents and the legal documents with the birth parents to ensure they understand what they're signing, to ensure that they understand the consequences of a consent to terminate parental rights, and when and how they can revoke that consent. It's important for you to understand that as well. So in both the private agency situation as well as the independent and private adoption, under both situations, you're going to be somewhat involved in waiting for termination of parental rights. And the consent signed by a birth parent cannot be, or can be, rescinded or revoked until it is approved by the court. And we cannot submit it to the court for approval and acceptance until after either 48 hours after it was signed or 48 hours after the child was born, depending on whichever is later. And so your attorney is going to talk with you. We would counsel you on what that timeline might look like in light of your particular situation. There are a number of risks along the way that we're happy to talk with clients about so they understand, so they can take those risks knowingly. But those are all things that we can assist with both in the private agency as well as the independent private adoption process. And I think that was the extent of what I wanted to share with you today. There are a lot more components to the legal process once you get your match and you move forward in your adoption. And I'm happy to talk with anyone who is more interested in finding out more about their own situation, or if they have a match, or if they're looking to make a match. But in terms of the overall structure of the 3 different pathways for adoption, this is a broad overview. And it gives you some ideas about what to go out and research to determine what is best and right for your family. Every family wants to know in our initial consultation, which one of these pathways is going to guarantee me success? Which one of these pathways is more likely for me to be matched with a child sooner? And really, we can't tell you exactly which is going to work for you. We do have clients who are fortunate in finding a match rather quickly. We have clients who have started with independent adoption and decided to move to agency adoption after some period of time when they didn't find a match, and then sat with an agency for a period of time before they found a match. So it's really just timing, and you have to decide which path you want to choose for your family, and you don't have to stick to one path. Once you start on one, if it's not successful after a period of time, you can try another. So if we can be of assistance in helping anyone through their adoption journey, we would be more than happy to help. Are there any questions? I think for purposes of questions would be in the chat feature. Very good. If you would like, the recording will be available on our website. And if you'd like any more information or specific to your situation, please do give us a call. Thank you.